At the end of my intro, I noted that Crystal Kingsby was played by an actress named L.A. Mort. At least that's how she's listed in the credits. It's a gag, of course. Crystal Kingsby is the lady in the lake. That's the plot's big reveal. L.A. Mort is the Americanized phonetic spelling of the French Elle est morte, meaning she is dead. Robert Montgomery was clearly having fun making this movie. Audiences and critics were split, however. Most reviewers thought the camera eye perspective was a gimmick, not a breakthrough, as certainly proved to be the case. And although the picture didn't tank, it turned a profit of about $600,000, it was not among the year's big box office winners. Dark Passage was a far bigger hit. This ended up being Robert Montgomery's final film at MGM, the studio where he'd spent the entirety of his career. For his next picture, he'd returned to hard-boiled territory with much better results, in my opinion, directing an adaptation of Dorothy B. Hughes's novel Ride the Pink Horse for Universal. No camera trickery in that one. Now, whether you thought it worked or not, you have to admit, the effort Montgomery put into this film was extraordinary, especially when you consider how big and cumbersome cameras were at the time. John Arnold, the head of MGM's camera department, devised a special dolly for the camera that had 4 independently controlled wheels, which allowed it to move like a fire truck's hook and ladder, prowling the studio streets and corridors with much greater ease. To accommodate actors playing to the camera, a seat was rigged at the front of the dolly for Montgomery, allowing him to trade lines with the actors. All this was a lot to ask of DP Paul Vogel, considering it was his first assignment since returning from military service in World War II, where he distinguished himself as a combat cinematographer in the European theater. For the fight scenes, Vogel operated a modified version of a Bell & Howell IMO camera attached to a flexible shoulder harness, essentially an early version of the now common Steadicam. One of the things the IMO was most interested in was Miss Fromset's comely blonde receptionist. That's Lila Leeds, who the year after this film was released would achieve her greatest notoriety, being busted by the LAPD while smoking weed with Robert Mitchum. Their arrests caused a big scandal, and while Mitchum bounced back after serving time in a county jail, Lila Leeds didn't fare as well. She too served jail time, where she purportedly became a heroin addict. The only notable acting gig she got after this was starring in the cautionary exploitation potboiler Wild Weed, later reissued as She Should Have Said No. Now, many fans of Philip Marlowe find fault with Montgomery's portrayal, despite the fact that you rarely see him. With Marlowe, the voice is everything, and Montgomery sounds a little chirpy and high-strung. Not what you want in a tough guy.
Vain female, aren't you?
But here's the thing. In real life, they didn't come tougher than this guy. As head of the fledgling Screen Actors Guild, Montgomery, despite incessant death threats, spearheaded a private investigation into organized crime's infiltration of the industry's craft unions, principally the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. Even as his studio's bosses were paying bribes to the mobsters who'd taken control of the unions to ensure the rank and file would never go on strike, Montgomery refused to be intimidated. It was his private investigation, undertaken at his own expense, that eventually exposed the Chicago mob's influence in Hollywood and eventually ended it. To borrow a line from Chandler, Robert Montgomery was as honest as you can expect a man to be in a world where it's going out of style. Of his miserable coexistence with the movie business, Raymond Chandler famously said, "Had my books been any worse, I would not have been invited to Hollywood. And if they had been any better, I would not have come." The good news is that his contempt for Hollywood resulted in what are arguably his 2 best novels. The Little Sister, published in 1949, allowed Chandler to take revenge on the movie business as Marlowe mouthed off about the soul corruption at the heart of the industry. Even better was 1953's The Long Goodbye, his masterpiece, and maybe the quintessential Los Angeles novel. By any measure, it is one of the most gorgeously written books in the English language. Chandler may have hated L.A., But for a bitter, aging wordsmith, the place was pure rocket fuel. Tell us what you thought of Lady in the Lake on our Facebook page and Twitter feed, and I hope you'll join me back here next week for another MGM film, one even less typical of the studio's usual fare than today's offering. It's Border Incident from 1949, about the smuggling of migrant farm workers across the Mexican border. Still relevant 70 years later. Right now, in the words of Philip Marlowe, I need a drink. I need a lot of life insurance. I need a vacation. I need a home in the country. But what I have is a coat, a hat, and a TV show. Until next week, stay in the shadows.